Hi guys, forget candle-lit banquets. Forget knights kneeling in shining armour, whispering love poems under a moonlit balcony. The truth is brutal. There was no such thing as dating in medieval Europe. What passed for romance was closer to livestock inspection, public humiliation, and bargaining over land than anything resembling love. And if you think that sounds grim, hold on, because it gets worse. Your first date wasn't a stroll through the fields or a secret kiss behind the barn. It was your parents dragging you in front of another family, where your body was picked apart like merchandise. Women were scrutinised for hips wide enough to birth children, hands soft enough to prove they hadn't worked too hard, and teeth strong enough to chew bread. Men weren't evaluated for charm or kindness. They were judged by the size of their land, the strength of their oxen, and whether their house had a roof that didn't leak. Imagine the scene: a muddy village square, chickens scratching in the dirt, neighbours leaning in to whisper as your father boasts about your virtues. You stand stiffly beside him, while an older woman pokes at your arms, squeezes your waist, even inspects your fingernails for signs of idleness or hard labour. If you're unlucky, she might even lift your chin to check your teeth. Smile too wide and you look foolish. Smile too little and they'll call you cold. Every gesture, every glance is judged. You're not a person in this moment. You're an investment. And then comes a talk of dowries, coins, cows, parcels of land, your body and future tied neatly to an exchange of property. Fathers haggled like traders in a marketplace. She'll come with 2 cows and a chest of linen, one might say, but your son must promise an acre of pasture and help with the roof. The deal had nothing to do with your heart. The only thing anyone cared about was your womb, your inheritance, and whether you'd embarrass the family. And if you think this sounds cold, but at least private, it wasn't. Courtship in medieval Europe was often public, even communal. Entire villages sometimes gathered to oversee the beginnings of a union. Picture this: you and your would-be spouse being shoved together in a shared bed, while relatives, neighbours, even clergy watched from the edges of the room. It was called a bedding ceremony, and the purpose was simple: to make sure you were both fit. Privacy was a luxury no one thought you deserved. Virginity, especially for women, was treated like a public commodity. Some regions went so far as to stage humiliating tests. Midwives, mothers-in-law, and occasionally even men of the village gathered to verify a young woman's purity before a marriage could proceed. The cruelty was endless. If you bled too little, whispers spread that you weren't pure. If you bled too much, gossip claimed you were cursed. Either way, your reputation hung on a spectacle you had no control over. And let's not pretend men escaped judgment. Young bachelors were expected to prove their virility, sometimes by boasting loudly in taverns, sometimes by being forced into trial marriages, where the community literally spied on whether the couple was sexually active. Imagine the humiliation of having your neighbours peeking through cracks in the wall, eager to report on whether you performed your duties. Dating in medieval times wasn't 2 people deciding to see if they were compatible. It was 2 families, sometimes 2 entire villages, deciding whether your bodies, your reputations, and your property matched. Love was irrelevant. Attraction was irrelevant. Your feelings? Absolutely irrelevant. And the darker truth: if you refused, if you resisted, if you dared to pursue your own desires, punishment was swift. Girls caught with lovers outside their betrothal could be publicly shamed, whipped, or forced to marry their seducer. Boys could be beaten, fined, or even branded. The message was clear. Dating wasn't yours to control. Society owned your body, and they weren't afraid to remind you. Now imagine yourself waking up one morning in a medieval village. You're 13, maybe 14, and your parents tell you today's the day. You're dressed in your best, which means the least mended tunic or dress you own, and marched into the square. Strangers you've never met glance you up and down, muttering about your hips, your teeth, your dowry. A boy you've barely spoken to stands nearby, sweating nervously while his father brags about his oxen. This is your future. Not because you chose it, because you were born into it. This was medieval dating, bargaining over your body, humiliating inspections, and public rituals that stripped you of privacy and dignity. No roses, no candles, just mud, livestock, and the sound of neighbours whispering about whether you'd make a good wife or a strong heir. And this is only the beginning. Because what came next, the bed tests, the love potions, the festivals, the punishments, made medieval courtship even stranger, dirtier, and more brutal than you can imagine. Forget the idea of falling in love. In medieval Europe, nobody asked you who you wanted to marry. The question was never, who makes your heart race? It was, who owns the most pigs? Who has the fattest field? Who can secure my family's survival? Marriage was less about feelings and more about deals, contracts, and cattle. If you were born into a peasant family, your father was already planning your future, long before you even reached puberty. For a daughter, marriage meant survival for the whole household. She was a bargaining chip, traded for dowries that could bring in livestock, land, or even small amounts of coin. For a son, marriage meant expanding the family's power, forming alliances, and gaining workers for the fields. Dowries were everything. A bride's family had to provide a package to make her appealing. Cows, goats, bolts of linen, maybe even a small plot of land. Fathers often bankrupted themselves trying to put together a decent dowry. Sometimes siblings went hungry, just so one daughter could marry into a better family. Without a dowry, a girl was considered worthless. The options then, be married off to an old man who needed a caretaker, or be forced into a convent to rot away in silence. On the groom's side, the transaction worked differently. He was expected to give what was called a mourning gift. This could be land, tools, or even animals, proof he could provide. A man without the means to show generosity was branded a failure. Villagers mocked him, women avoided him, and he became the butt of tavern jokes about half men who couldn't even afford to wed. Picture it, a smoky hall filled with men reeking of ale and sweat. Two fathers sit at a rough wooden table, voices rising as they bargain over the fate of their children. She'll bring 2 cows, 3 geese, and a chest of linens, one insists. The other slams his fist down. And my son will give her half the field by the river, and 2 sheep. Their voices grow louder. The crowd leans in. Mothers whisper in the background, while the young boy and girl, barely more than children, sit silently in the corner, their lives being traded away like sacks of grain. Consent, irrelevant, attraction, laughable. What mattered was property, reputation, and survival. And it wasn't just peasants. Nobles played the same game, only with higher stakes. Kings married off daughters to secure peace treaties. Lords sent their sons across borders to wed women they had never seen. A princess wasn't a daughter. She was a political pawn, shipped off like cargo to keep 2 kingdoms from slaughtering each other. Her feelings didn't matter. Only her womb, her dowry, and the soldiers her marriage could command. The cruelty was baked into the system. Girls were often married off the moment they began menstruating, sometimes as young as 12 or 13. Their childhood ended the moment their bodies were deemed fertile. They were thrust into homes of men 2 or 3 times their age, expected to produce children immediately. And if they failed, whispers of curses, infertility, or witchcraft spread like wildfire. For men, the humiliation came in different ways. If a young man resisted marriage, his own family could cut him off. Refusing to marry was seen as selfish, even sinful. A bachelor was mocked as weak, cursed, or not truly a man. Communities ridiculed older unmarried men by forcing them into public humiliation rituals. Some were paraded on donkeys made to wear ridiculous costumes, or even whipped in the streets until they promised to wed. Marriage contracts weren't private either. They were often read aloud before the entire village. Every clause, every cow, every acre of land announced publicly. Everyone knew exactly what was exchanged. Everyone knew who got the better deal. If your dowry was too small, your new husband's family would sneer at you. If your morning gift was too cheap, your in-laws mocked you at feasts. A couple's very worth was reduced to what their families could bargain for, on a table sticky with spilled ale. Now put yourself in that moment. You're 14, maybe 15. Your father takes you to a meeting with another family. You're dressed in your best, though your best is just a patched tunic, washed for the occasion. You sit quietly while grown men debate your worth in pigs and goats. Your future husband, a man in his 30s, sits across from you, chewing with his mouth open, his hands calloused, his teeth already rotting. He doesn't speak to you, doesn't even look at you. You aren't a person to him. You're part of the deal, a dowry wrapped in flesh. And when your father finally slaps hands with his, sealing the bargain, your life is no longer yours. This was medieval dating. It wasn't flowers, flattery, or stolen kisses. It was livestock, coin, and shame. And the strangest, dirtiest part? Sometimes the community made sure the deal was real by demanding proof, which meant couples didn't just endure negotiations, they were shoved straight into humiliating rituals to prove their fitness for marriage. Forget roses and chocolates. In the Middle Ages, romantic gestures were crude, filthy, and often humiliating. If you wanted to woo someone, you didn't whisper sweet poetry unless you were a troubadour in a noble court. And even then, it was more performance than passion. For ordinary people, courtship was a bizarre mix of dirty jokes, strange gifts, and community involvement that made privacy impossible. For peasants, the most common gift in early courtship wasn't a flower, it was food. But not just any food. An apple handed to a girl could symbolise fertility. A hunk of bacon or a slab of fat carried heavy sexual undertones, the message being clear: I can feed you and I can satisfy you. Sometimes men gave women eggs, but not for breakfast. The egg was a crude symbol of reproduction, a wink-wink gesture that left little to the imagination. Imagine standing in a muddy street while a sweaty farmer pushes a half-rotten apple into your hand and smirks. Romantic? Not exactly. In some places, ale played the role of love token. A man might brew a special batch and present it to a girl's family as proof of his seriousness. If she accepted a mug, gossip spread instantly. They're practically betrothed. But if she refused, he became the subject of tavern jokes, mocked for being too weak to win her favour. Men often laced their offerings with herbs, creating crude love potions meant to stir desire. Some even used animal parts, mixing powdered bone or dried blood into drinks, convinced it would spark passion. What it usually sparked was disgust or worse, sickness. Courtship was rarely private. Villagers watched, teased, and interfered at every step. If a young man lingered too long near a girl's window, children might sing obscene songs mocking them. Groups of youth sometimes staged charivari, loud disruptive parades outside a couple's house, banging pots, blowing horns, and shouting lewd verses about what they thought the pair were doing inside. The more humiliating the song, the louder the laughter. Couples were expected to endure this noise with smiles, proof that they could handle public scrutiny. And then there were the tests of strength and endurance. In some villages, men had to prove themselves through rough games, wrestling matches, log carrying, or even fistfights. Winning wasn't just about pride. It proved you could protect a wife, plough a field, and survive hardship. Lose and your chances at marriage plummeted. Some women even egged on fights between suitors, laughing as men bloodied each other for their favour. Imagine two farm boys grappling in the mud, faces swollen, teeth chipped, while the girl they both want watches with folded arms. But even when a couple seemed matched, the humiliation didn't end. Communities invented rituals to make sure the match was appropriate. In parts of France and Germany, a young man was expected to carry his intended bride across fields or through icy rivers, supposedly to prove his strength and devotion. If he stumbled, villagers roared with laughter, jeering that the marriage would fail. If he succeeded, they still mocked, joking about what else he might carry into the marriage bed. And for women, courtship could be terrifying. Families and neighbours often joked about their virginity, treating it like a public matter. Girls were mocked in songs, pressured in games, and sometimes cornered during festivals by men trying to test their modesty. At fairs, groups of youths played games where they tried to tug ribbons, or sometimes entire garments, off girls in front of cheering crowds. The line between courtship, humiliation, and harassment was razor thin and often ignored altogether. Even within serious relationships, gestures were anything but romantic. A man might give a woman a belt or a garter as a token, but everyone knew it symbolised sex. A woman might give a man a handkerchief, but embroidered with symbols that left little doubt about her intentions. Courtship was always half-coded, half obscene, a performance that left no room for genuine tenderness. Now imagine yourself again. You're a young girl standing in a village square. A boy approaches, grinning awkwardly, and thrusts a lump of pig fat into your hand. Your friends giggle, your mother watches from the doorway. The boy's meaning is obvious, and the whole village sees it. You blush not from shyness, but from humiliation. The gift isn't private, it's a declaration shouted through gossip, a joke waiting to happen. Or flip it. You're a boy, staggering under the weight of a log, trying to impress a crowd. Your back aches, your arms tremble. The girl you're trying to impress watches with cool disinterest. You trip, fall face first in the mud, and the villagers erupt in laughter. For the rest of the year, you're known as the one who couldn't carry his bride. One mistake, one stumble, and your reputation collapses. Courtship in the Middle Ages wasn't a gentle dance of affection. It was a dirty, public, humiliating process filled with strange symbols, obscene songs, and constant scrutiny. Every gesture was a gamble. Every gift carried innuendo, and every step forward was shadowed by the laughter and judgment of your neighbours. Dating today might be awkward, but compared to medieval courtship, swiping left is a blessing. Forget candlelit wedding nights. In the Middle Ages, privacy was a luxury few couples ever tasted, especially when it came to proving a marriage was real. Communities demanded evidence. Families insisted on public proof. And so humiliating rituals developed, ones that blurred the line between tradition, spectacle, and outright voyeurism. One of the most shocking practices was the bedding ceremony. After the feast, the newlywed couple wasn't quietly excused to a private chamber. Instead, they were marched, sometimes half-dragged, to the marital bed, while family, friends, and neighbours crowded in behind them. Torches lit the room, ale sloshed in mugs, bawdy songs filled the air. The bride and groom weren't left alone. They were surrounded, poked, teased, and sometimes even undressed by drunken relatives who wanted to make sure the union was consummated. Imagine it. You're a young girl, barely 14, trembling as your mother-in-law yanks at your dress while shouting jokes about your duties. Men jeer, women laugh, children peek through the door. You're shoved into bed with a man you barely know, your body trembling with fear and shame. Instead of privacy, you face a wall of eyes. The community watches, waiting for proof that you've done what's expected. And proof mattered. Without consummation, marriages could be annulled. Families demanded evidence, sometimes literally, in the form of stained sheets paraded before witnesses the next morning. If no evidence appeared, whispers spread like wildfire. Was the bride barren? Was the groom impotent? Families fought, dowries were contested, reputations destroyed. The bedding ceremony wasn't just humiliating, it was legally binding. Some regions went even further. In parts of France and Germany, couples endured a trial night. They were forced to share a bed while relatives sat in the room, watching for signs of passion. A curtain might be drawn, but it rarely blocked sound. Giggles, gasps, or silence all carried meaning, and gossip spread instantly. Villagers repeated every detail, real or imagined, until the entire community knew exactly how the couple performed. And when fertility was in question, the tests grew darker. Some communities believed that couples needed to prove they could conceive before a marriage was fully valid. That meant extended surveillance, weeks of neighbours spying, families interrogating, and midwives examining brides for signs of pregnancy. Your private life wasn't private at all. It was a public affair, dissected by everyone from your in-laws to the village gossip. Failure carried brutal consequences. If a bride didn't bleed on her wedding night, accusations of lost virginity erupted. Some families publicly humiliated women, dragging them through the streets with mocking songs. Men who failed to perform were shamed even more viciously. Villagers tied horns to their heads, paraded them on donkeys, and mocked them as cuckolds before they'd even had a chance to start a family. And then there were the truly grotesque customs. In some towns, elders literally inspected the couple's bed after the wedding night, sniffing sheets, searching for stains, and pronouncing judgment like forensic examiners. In extreme cases, brides suspected of impurity were forced into humiliating public tests, stripped and examined by midwives or even male officials. Virginity wasn't private, it was political, and your body became evidence. Imagine yourself in this world. The feast is over. Your head swims with cheap ale, your stomach turns with dread. Villagers shove you and your new husband into a room. Torches blaze, faces crowd close, your body is heavy with shame as you're pushed into bed. Every laugh, every whistle, every crude joke cuts into you. There is no escape. Even if you close your eyes, you hear them breathing, waiting, demanding proof. And in the morning, your life depends on whether a piece of linen convinces them that you bled. For men, the humiliation was just as harsh. A single moment of hesitation, a single failure, and your masculinity was questioned forever. Bachelors in taverns mocked you. Children sang songs about your useless spear. Neighbours whispered that your wife would find satisfaction elsewhere. You weren't just a man who failed in bed. You were a man who failed society. This wasn't romance. This was ritualized humiliation, designed to turn private intimacy into public spectacle. Love had nothing to do with it. Lust wasn't even yours to control. Your body, your marriage, your very dignity all belonged to the crowd. Dating today may feel awkward, full of swipes, rejections, and bad first impressions, but compared to medieval courtship, it's paradise. Because at least today, No one demands that your neighbours watch from the corner of the room while you prove your worth between the sheets. Forget whispered secrets about a bride's purity. In the Middle Ages, virginity wasn't just a personal matter, it was a public obsession. Entire families, even whole villages, treated a woman's body like property to be inspected, debated, and proven in ways that today feel grotesque and cruel. Virginity was currency. It raised a dowry's value, secured alliances, and guaranteed that the children a woman bore would belong to her husband's bloodline. But how could anyone prove purity? That question led to humiliating rituals that turned women's bodies into evidence for all to judge. One of the most common practices was the so-called virginity inspection. Before a marriage contract could be finalised, an older woman, a midwife, a matron, or sometimes even a village elder, was called to examine the bride-to-be. The inspection was invasive, crude, and based on myths about the female body. If the examiner claimed to see signs of prior sexual activity, the marriage could collapse on the spot. Imagine the terror. Your entire future hinging on the opinion of someone peering at your body with no medical knowledge at all. But it didn't stop there. In some towns, inspections weren't private. They were communal events. Mothers, aunts, even male relatives stood by, nodding grimly, as a young girl was forced to strip under the eyes of people she had known her entire life. If she blushed, if she cried, if she resisted, whispers began. She hides something. A single rumour could ruin her no matter what the inspection showed. And then came the wedding night tests. In many regions, families demanded proof of virginity in the form of blood-stained sheets. The morning after the ceremony, servants or relatives inspected the linen. If it bore blood, it was paraded publicly as evidence of purity. If not, panic. Gossip spread instantly. Some families dragged the bride into the streets, mocking her as impure. Others returned her to her parents, dowry forfeited, her reputation destroyed. Of course, biology doesn't always cooperate. Not every woman bled on her first sexual encounter. Medieval people didn't care. Failure to produce blood was seen as deceit, sin, or even witchcraft. To fix the problem, some brides pricked their thighs or hid small bladders of animal blood under their gowns, bursting them during the night. Desperation drove them to literal trickery, just to survive their own wedding. For men, these rituals were just as cruel, though in different ways. If a groom failed to consummate the marriage, his entire masculinity was questioned. Neighbours mocked him, family cursed him, and his wife's relatives sometimes demanded the dowry back. In France, humiliated grooms were occasionally forced into court, where judges ordered physical tests of virility. Imagine being forced to prove your manhood in front of officials. Your body reduced to a spectacle of ridicule. Some cases grew even darker. Chroniclers described communities dragging newlyweds into public squares if suspicions arose. Crowds jeered while elders interrogated the couple, demanding explanations. In extreme cases, women accused of impurity were stripped and beaten. Their humiliation turned into communal entertainment. These weren't rare horrors. They were traditions passed down, rituals accepted as normal. Now put yourself there. You're 15, trembling in a candlelit room as strange hands pull at your gown. Your mother hovers, your future mother-in-law sneers, and a matron peers between your thighs, declaring judgment on your entire worth. You want to scream, to fight, to run. But your family's future depends on your silence. Or imagine the morning after your wedding, your husband trembling beside you as relatives storm the room, seizing the sheets, lifting them high, sniffing, prodding, demanding proof of blood while you bury your face in your hands. Virginity wasn't purity, it was humiliation, weaponized by families to control women's bodies. It was less about morality and more about economics. A pure bride secured better deals, bigger dowries, and more powerful alliances. An impure one was ruined, her value slashed like spoiled meat in a market, and the cruelty had no mercy. Even women widowed young, through no fault of their own, were often treated as damaged goods. If they dared to remarry, their reputations followed them. They were whispered about, mocked, and sometimes subjected to fresh humiliations to prove they were still worthy. This was medieval dating stripped bare, not two people discovering love, but entire communities dissecting and policing women's bodies. Privacy didn't exist. Dignity didn't matter. All that mattered was blood on a sheet and whispers in the dark. Forget perfume and poetry. In the Middle Ages, if you wanted someone to fall for you, you didn't send flowers. You mixed a potion. And these weren't sweet elixirs brewed with honey and roses. They were foul, dangerous, and often disgusting. Because in a world where marriage was business and romance nearly impossible, people turned to magic to force desire. Love magic was everywhere. Women desperate to keep a husband loyal. Men desperate to win a bride. Lonely villagers craving attention. All sought charms, powders, and potions. And the ingredients? Nothing you'd ever want near your lips. One common recipe called for menstrual blood mixed into wine. A woman would secretly stir it into her husband's drink, believing it would bind him to her forever. The taste? Metallic, foul, impossible to hide, but men who dared complain risked being mocked as bewitched. Others used urine the same way, slipping it into stews or ales. Folklore promised that whoever consumed it would be hopelessly enslaved to the giver. Imagine sitting at a feast, smiling over a mug of ale, never knowing you were sipping your lover's bodily fluids. Then there were charms involving animal parts, crushed pigeon hearts, dried toads, and even powdered testicles of goats were believed to ignite lust. Some women tied dead frogs around their waists. Others baked bread with ground bones in it, feeding it to their intended partners. The message was clear. Love was something to be forced, manipulated, and dirtied, not discovered. Sexual fluids were also common in these potions. Some instructions demanded women smear vaginal fluids on doorways or bed frames to trap men inside their love. Others suggested men rub semen into a woman's clothing so she would think only of him. In villages where everyone knew everyone, people whispered constantly about who had bewitched whom, and what disgusting ritual they had used. And then there was sympathetic magic. A girl might pluck a man's hair, mix it with her blood, and bury it under his doorstep. Others carried charms made from nail clippings, animal dung, or, most grotesque of all, graved dirt. Superstition claimed that dirt taken from a corpse's mouth, sprinkled into food, would keep a partner faithful. Imagine swallowing soup that tastes faintly of earth, never realising it carried remnants of a dead man's jaw. But it wasn't only peasants. Nobles and queens dabbled in this filth too. Chroniclers accused powerful women of brewing love potions to control kings. Stories spread of court ladies grinding exotic spices with drops of blood to keep lovers close. The richer the household, the more elaborate the rituals became. Behind the silk curtains of castles, the same dirty tricks were whispered, just disguised with perfume and incense. Failure to produce love naturally also created fear. Women who failed to hold a man were accused of witchcraft, damned either way. If she kept him faithful, she was called a sorceress. If he strayed, she was mocked as powerless. Men too feared humiliation. A weak husband might accuse rivals of enchanting his wife, claiming no honest woman could desire another. And some potions were deadly. Recipes included poisonous herbs like belladonna and henbane, which caused hallucinations, seizures, or death. Desperate lovers often poisoned their targets, believing the sickness was proof of passion. Imagine drinking from a cup laced with nightshade, your body trembling, your vision spinning, while your would-be partner leans in and whispers that this is true love. Now place yourself there. You're a young villager attending a feast. A girl slips a cup of ale into your hand. You drink. The taste is bitter, strange. Hours later, your stomach twists, your skin burns, your thoughts turn hazy. Whispers spread. She bewitched him. You vomit into the mud. Neighbours laugh. And the girl who gave you the drink is already being accused of sorcery. Your misery, your humiliation, becomes a tale the village repeats for years. Love in the Middle Ages wasn't tender. It was desperate, manipulative, and drenched in filth. Magic didn't create romance, it created paranoia. Every gift, every drink, every bite of bread carried suspicion. Who had bewitched whom? Who had slipped blood or urine into a meal? Who had stolen grave dirt for a charm? Dating today might feel messy, but at least you don't have to wonder whether your wine was seasoned with menstrual blood or whether the bread on your table hides powdered bones. For medieval lovers, that was reality. Forget quiet moments of flirting. In the medieval world, even the smallest spark of romance was dragged out into the open and ridiculed. Communities thrived on public shaming, and nothing was more entertaining than mocking young couples. What should have been tender was turned into comedy, crude, filthy, and humiliating comedy. Songs were the sharpest weapon. Villagers composed bawdy verses about anyone caught lingering too long with a potential partner. A boy seen talking to a girl by the well might wake up the next morning to find half the village singing about how he watered more than the buckets. Girls weren't spared either. If a maiden blushed at a boy's joke, neighbours sang that she was already warming his bed in her thoughts. These songs weren't gentle teasing. They were filthy, vulgar, and designed to make young people squirm. And it wasn't just words, it was rituals. One of the most notorious was the charivari, sometimes called rough music. If villagers suspected a couple of inappropriate romance, sneaking off without permission, breaking engagement rules, or even just showing too much affection in public, crowds gathered at night. They clanged pots, blew horns, and screamed outside the couple's house. The noise was deafening. The goal wasn't to celebrate, but to shame. People shouted insults, sang obscene songs, and sometimes carried effigies of donkeys or pigs to symbolise the couple's lustful behaviour. Imagine trying to sleep while your entire village mocked you outside your window until dawn. Public festivals were just as cruel. Fairs often included games where couples were targeted for ridicule. One involved seating a girl on a cart while young men tried to win her by pulling her off, laughter erupting as she screamed and fought back. Another saw men and women forced into dances where they were mocked with sexual gestures, the crowd jeering every awkward step. Far from private courtship, this was romance as humiliation. A performance for everyone else's entertainment. Even weddings weren't safe. At some feasts, guests sang explicit songs about what the couple would be doing later in bed. Priests pretended to bless them while slipping in crude jokes. Children peeked through doors, giggling, while adults made wagers on how quickly the bride would conceive. Instead of privacy, the newlyweds' first night became the punchline of an endless village joke. And for those who resisted marriage, the ridicule was worse. Unmarried women past a certain age were mocked as spinsters, sometimes literally forced to sit with spinning wheels in public squares, while children laughed at them. Older bachelors were paraded around on donkeys dressed in ridiculous costumes or smeared with soot and feathers. Their failure to marry became a carnival for the community. Even literature joined in the mockery. Troubadour songs and fabulots, short obscene tales told by travelling performers, often ridiculed lovers. A recurring theme was the cuckolded husband, mocked for not being able to control his wife. Another was the bumbling young man, desperate for love, who was tricked, beaten, or humiliated. The humour was always dirty, always cruel, and always a reminder that romance came with risk. If you failed, everyone laughed at you. Now put yourself there. You sneak away with someone you like. Just a quiet moment by the river. You laugh, you talk, maybe your fingers brush together. By morning the entire village knows. Children chant a filthy rhyme with your names in it. Old men wink and ask crude questions. Women snicker behind their hands. You feel the heat of humiliation burning your face, not because of what you did, but because of how they made it public. Or imagine being dragged from your house at midnight, pots and pans clanging outside, voices screaming obscene songs about your sin. You stand at the window, pale and shaking, while your neighbours jeer and laugh, refusing to stop until you break down in shame. This was the medieval version of dating gossip, amplified, weaponised, and impossible to escape. Romance wasn't private, it was public property, ripe for ridicule. Your blushes, your glances, your secrets, all turned into entertainment for others. In a world where survival meant community, love was never just between two people. It was between two families, two villages, and everyone who wanted a laugh at your expense. Forget love letters and whispered proposals. In the Middle Ages, one of the fastest ways to get a wife was to steal her, literally. Marriage by abduction wasn't just a barbaric anomaly. In many places, it was a tolerated, even expected tradition. For poor men who couldn't afford a dowry, or families too desperate to wait for proper negotiations, abduction was a shortcut. A young man gathered friends, sometimes drunk, sometimes armed, and ambushed the girl he wanted. She might be dragged from a field, snatched from a festival, or ripped straight out of her parents' house. Screaming didn't matter. Struggling didn't matter. Once she was in his possession, the negotiation began. Communities often turned a blind eye. If the man's family was strong enough, or the couple was already rumoured to be sweet on each other, villagers shrugged it off. Parents, humiliated and powerless, were pressured to accept the union. After all, if the girl had already spent a night in her abductor's house, her reputation was ruined. Better to marry her off than live with the stain of scandal. Sometimes the violence was theatrical. Gangs of men stormed through villages at night, carrying torches, shouting, and dragging girls into the mud, while neighbours peeked from windows. The girls' cries mixed with laughter and jeers from the crowd. By morning, the act was spun into a story of romance, twisted into a narrative of passion and inevitability. The shame fell not on the man, but on the woman, whose virtue was now considered tainted. And don't think this was just a peasant custom. Nobles used abduction as well. Chronicles tell of lords seizing women they desired, sometimes from rival families, sometimes from convents. Monasteries complained of men storming nunnery walls to carry off young novices. Kings themselves sanctioned abductions as political tools, arranging kidnappings that were later legalised as marriages to secure alliances. For women, it was devastating. A girl abducted lost everything: her honour, her family's bargaining power, and often her freedom. Some resisted fiercely, earning reputations as rebellious or ungrateful brides. Others were forced into silence, their protests ignored, while priests blessed unions forged in violence. Imagine being 15, dragged from your bed at night, your neighbours watching, your screams dismissed as custom. By dawn, you're not a victim, you're a wife. And if she returned home, the shame was unbearable. The parents feared gossip more than the act itself. A girl stolen but not married became almost unmarriageable. Suitors avoided her, whispers chased her, and entire families carried the stain of dishonour. For many, the only escape was forced entry into a convent, condemned to a life of prayer and silence. Communities sometimes staged grotesque rituals to justify abductions. In certain regions, once a girl was taken, families held mock feasts where neighbours celebrated the union. The bride was paraded through the village in dirty clothes, a parody of a wedding procession. People threw ashes, dung, or rotten food at her while shouting crude songs. What began in violence ended in humiliation, dressed up as tradition. Men bragged about it. In taverns, abductors told stories of their conquests, laughing about how easily a girl screamed or how quickly her family gave in. Friends toasted to the victory, mugs slamming down, while the girl's life was reduced to a dirty anecdote. For men it was glory. For women it was ruin. Now picture it. You're a girl of 13, walking home from the well. Suddenly, 3 boys leapt from the shadows. They grab your arms, cover your mouth, drag you through the mud. Your bucket spills, your dress tears, neighbours watch from doorways but do nothing. Hours later, you're shoved into a stranger's bed. By morning the priest arrives, the marriage is declared valid. You never said yes, you never had a choice. This wasn't some rare horror. It was woven into the fabric of medieval courtship. A brutal shortcut, a filthy tradition, and a reminder that in this world, romance wasn't yours to claim. It was something taken, by force, by shame, and by the weight of everyone else's silence. Forget engagements with rings and promises. In some parts of medieval Europe, before a marriage was declared official, a couple had to pass a test, a trial marriage. On paper, it sounded simple, 2 young people living together for a time to see if they were compatible. But in reality, it was humiliating, invasive, and drenched in gossip. Trial marriages varied across regions, but the theme was always the same. The community didn't trust couples to handle their own intimacy, so they watched, they pried, they judged. A couple was put into the same house, or sometimes just the same bed, for a set period. A few nights, a week, even months. Neighbours kept close tabs. Parents interrogated them. Priests asked questions no one should answer in public. Privacy didn't exist. The main goal wasn't romance, it was fertility. Communities wanted to make sure a woman could conceive and a man could perform. That meant everyone around them was waiting for signs. Noises from the house, changes in the woman's body, whispers about how happy the couple looked. Sometimes, villagers literally stationed themselves nearby, eavesdropping and laughing at every creak of the bed. Imagine trying to share your first moments of intimacy while half the village pressed ears to the wall. And if nothing happened? Shame came swiftly. If a bride didn't conceive within the trial period, suspicions of barrenness spread. If a groom failed to impress, rumours branded him impotent. Either outcome could end the marriage, ruin reputations, or force families into bitter disputes over dowries. A single failed trial could haunt a woman for life, making her almost unmarriageable. For men, it could mean years of mockery. Villagers composing filthy songs about their limp spear or their empty fields. Some regions took it further. Couples were literally bound together in bed, tied at the waist with ropes to ensure they slept side by side. Servants checked in at dawn to see if the knots were loosened. Others practiced bundling, where a board was placed between the couple in bed, supposedly to prevent intercourse. But everyone knew the point was temptation, and neighbours gossiped endlessly about whether the pair had found ways around the barrier. The hypocrisy was glaring. Communities pretended to enforce modesty while secretly hoping to catch the couple breaking it. And then there were the grotesque inspections. Midwives might examine a bride after a trial marriage to see if her body showed signs of use. Men were sometimes paraded half-naked before elders who mocked their performance. Imagine being forced to stand before your father, your priest and your neighbours while they debate whether you've proven yourself in bed. Failure didn't just bring shame, it brought punishment. In some villages, couples who failed a trial were humiliated publicly. Men were dressed in women's clothes and paraded through the streets. Women were smeared with ashes or feathers. Children sang obscene rhymes about their failure, and neighbours jeered whenever they passed. A failed trial wasn't private embarrassment, it was lifelong stigma. Now imagine yourself. You're 15, shoved into a small hut with someone you barely know. Villagers crowd outside, whispering, laughing, waiting for proof that you've done what they expect. You lie in the dark, heart pounding, knowing that tomorrow your sheets, your body, your very reputation will be discussed by everyone you've ever met. You can't choose whether to love, you can't even choose whether to be left alone. For nobles, trial marriages were political tools. A lord might demand his daughter's suitor live with her before approving the union, ensuring he could sire heirs. Chronicles tell of young men forced into rooms with noble women while servants literally took notes outside the door. Failure wasn't just embarrassing, it could cost dynasties their futures. In every class, trial marriages revealed the same ugly truth. Medieval dating was never private. It was communal, invasive, and humiliating. Your love life wasn't your own. It belonged to your family, your neighbours, your priest, and anyone eager for gossip. Modern dating may be awkward, but at least no one ties you to a bed while your neighbours take bets on whether you'll succeed. In the Middle Ages, that was reality. Forget jewellery boxes, roses, or romantic letters sealed with wax. In the Middle Ages, when someone wanted to show affection, the gifts were crude, dirty, and often more insulting than flattering. Courtship wasn't about beauty. It was about survival, fertility, and raw public symbolism. Food was the most common token, but every item carried a message. An apple wasn't just a piece of fruit. It was a symbol of fertility, whispered about as a promise of children. To hand someone an apple in the marketplace wasn't sweet. It was a public hint that you were already imagining them bearing your heirs. Imagine being a girl of 13, cheeks red with embarrassment, while a red-faced boy presses an apple into your palm and everyone around bursts into laughter. Even stranger were the offerings of meat and fat. A slab of bacon, a chunk of lard, or a hunk of cheese could be presented as proof that a man could feed a wife. But everyone knew the double meaning. Fat was linked to fertility, grease to desire. Women handed these gifts often blushed not from romance but from humiliation, knowing the whole village was winking about what it meant. And if a boy dared to give nothing, he was mocked as poor, weak, or incapable of providing, not a real man. Eggs also carried weight. A basket of eggs handed over during a festival was as close to a crude marriage proposal as a peasant could get. The symbolism was obvious: reproduction, life, fertility. But if the eggs broke on the way, villagers snickered that the man's seed would be weak. Even accidents became jokes at the expense of the would-be couple. Clothing was another gift, but never simple. A man might give a belt, a garter, or even a pair of shoes, items with strong sexual undertones. A belt symbolised control over the body. A garter whispered of the bedchamber. Shoes carried the implication of walking together through life, but also had bawdy connotations in tavern songs that reduced the gift to a filthy innuendo. To accept such a gift was to accept the gossip that followed. And then there were the outright humiliating tokens. Some men gave women animal parts, a rooster's comb, a rabbit's foot, even pig's intestines, as charms of passion. Women were supposed to laugh, but the meaning was clear and filthy. To refuse was dangerous too. A man slighted in public might spread rumours, branding a girl cold, barren, or already spoiled. The worst part? These gifts were rarely private. Exchanges happened in markets, at festivals, or in front of families. Everyone watched, everyone snickered, and everyone interpreted the meaning. A girl carrying home a chunk of fat was a walking joke. A boy wearing a ribbon from a girl's sleeve was mocked by peers who sang obscene songs about what else she might have given him. Courtship wasn't intimacy. It was public performance. Even noble gifts carried filth beneath the polish. Troubadours sang of knights offering silks or jewels, but chronicles revealed the truth. Noble women were often given exotic foods, spices, or even live animals as tokens. Imagine a lady of the court receiving a monkey or a peacock as a romantic gesture. Behind the glitter, the symbolism was the same: fertility, dominance, possession. Now imagine yourself. You're a girl, standing in the mud of a festival square. A boy marches up, grinning, and thrusts a dripping piece of bacon into your hands. The crowd erupts. Someone shouts a crude joke about your future together. You feel your cheeks burn, not from flattery, but from shame. That greasy lump in your palm is now a public symbol of desire. You can't drop it without insulting him, but holding it brands you as his, whether you want it or not. Or picture being a boy. You scrape together what little you can afford. A basket of eggs, carefully carried across town. But halfway there, you stumble, the eggs crack, yolk dripping down your legs. Children laugh, old men roar with crude jokes, and the girl you meant to impress shakes her head. Your gift, your gesture, becomes a humiliation you'll never live down. Courtship in the Middle Ages was never about quiet gestures of love. It was a game of symbols, jokes, and shame. Gifts weren't private tokens. They were public declarations, loaded with innuendo, ripe for gossip. Every apple, every garter, every dripping hunk of fat carried weight, not the weight of romance, but of reputation. Dating today might feel clumsy, but at least no one hands you a lump of grease in the middle of the marketplace while your neighbours cheer. In the Middle Ages, that was as close as you got to romance. Forget Valentine's Day dances or sweet strolls under lanterns. In medieval Europe, festivals and fairs weren't just about music and feasting. They were arenas where the community turned romance into brutal spectacle. Young men and women were shoved into games designed less for fun and more for humiliation, where love and shame tangled in front of laughing crowds. One of the most notorious customs involved tearing at clothes. During spring festivals, especially around May Day, boys chased girls through fields or festival squares. If they caught one, they didn't offer flowers. They ripped ribbons, yanked shawls, even tore entire garments. The crowd cheered, laughing at the girl's red cheeks and exposed arms. Some games were even more aggressive. Boys grabbed at skirts, lifting them high, while bystanders roared. What was framed as play was in truth public violation disguised as fun. Other games involved seating a girl in a cart or on a stool, while boys circled like predators. One by one, they tried to pull her down while she fought to stay seated. Every stumble, every shriek, every torn sleeve fed the crowd's laughter. Winning wasn't the point. The spectacle was the prize. The girl's dignity was stripped along with her clothes. At some fairs, couples were mocked in crude competitions. Boys had to carry girls on their backs through muddy fields or icy rivers. If they stumbled, the crowd jeered. If they succeeded, the jokes were even dirtier. Neighbours shouting about how the couple would practice carrying weight in bed. Either way, the couple lost. The game was never about romance, it was about public humiliation. And then there were the obscene songs and dances. Whole groups of young men formed circles around a couple, singing bawdy verses about their supposed love life. Some songs described in grotesque detail what the crowd imagined they were doing, or would do, later that night. Girls tried to laugh it off, but the cruelty was sharp. Every blush, every nervous glance became fresh fuel for the singers. In some regions, couples were forced into mock weddings during fairs. A boy and girl who exchanged glances too often, or were seen walking together, might suddenly find themselves dragged to the centre of the crowd. Someone played a priest, others acted as witnesses, and the two were married on the spot with laughter, jeers, and obscene jokes. Once labelled as husband and wife, the teasing never ended. Children shouted it in the streets, adults winked, and their lives became gossip fodder for months. And it wasn't just games for the young. Adults joined in the mockery. Fathers joked loudly about their daughters' fertility. Mothers warned boys not to break their girls before the wedding. Even priests sometimes chuckled, pretending not to notice while secretly enjoying the laughter. What should have been moments of tenderness became theatre, and everyone in the village bought a ticket. Now imagine yourself in that world. You're a girl, barely 14, dressed in your best for the festival. Music plays, dancers whirl, and then suddenly boys surround you. One lunges, tearing a ribbon from your dress. Another yanks your sleeve. The crowd laughs. You scream, you fight, but the laughter drowns your protests. By the end, your clothes hang in tatters, your dignity shredded before your neighbour's eyes. Or flip it. You're a boy hauling a girl across a muddy stream while everyone cheers. Your feet slip, you plunge face first into the water, dragging her down with you. The mud clings to your clothes. The crowd howls with laughter. Songs erupt about your weak legs and softer spear. For the rest of the year, you'll hear those jokes in the tavern, every time you lift a mug. Even festivals meant to celebrate fertility were twisted into cruelty. Villages performed rituals where couples had to kiss in front of everyone, cheered on by the crowd. The kiss wasn't tender, it was forced, exaggerated, mocked. Every gesture of affection became entertainment for others, stripping intimacy of all meaning. What passed for dating at these festivals wasn't about choice or love. It was about spectacle, control, and shame. Privacy was stolen, bodies were mocked, and desire became a dirty game played in public. Modern dating may be awkward, but at least no one shoves you into a muddy river or tears your clothes off while your neighbours clap and sing. In the Middle Ages, that was courtship. Forget the idea of like secret romance blossoming in hidden corners. In the medieval world, if love crossed the wrong boundaries, wrong family, wrong time, wrong contract, it wasn't just frowned upon, it was punished. And punishment was never private. Communities turned forbidden love into a carnival of humiliation. One of the most infamous methods was the donkey ride. If a man or woman was caught in an affair, or even just suspected of inappropriate intimacy, the punishment could be savage comedy. The guilty party was stripped to their underclothes, smeared with soot, sometimes feathers, and paraded through the village on a donkey, but not facing forward. They were forced to ride backward, a public symbol of shame. Crowds followed, banging pots, jeering and singing obscene songs about the lovers' sins. Children laughed, adults hurled insults, and the humiliation clung for years after. Couples caught together were often punished jointly. Tied to each other with ropes, they were dragged through streets while neighbours spat and threw rotten food. Some villages forced them to wear wooden yokes around their necks, so close they couldn't move apart, bumping awkwardly while the crowd jeered. The message was clear. Your passion belongs to us and we'll make sure you never forget it. And then there were the Charivari punishments. The same noisy rituals used to mock newlyweds were twisted against adulterers and forbidden lovers. Neighbours gathered at night, clanging pans and horns, surrounding the guilty pair's house. They shouted filthy rhymes, parodied prayers, even staged mock trials in the mud outside. The couple could do nothing but hide, trembling, while their community turned their private life into entertainment. In some regions, punishments grew even crueler. Lovers were smeared with pitch or tar, then rolled in feathers. Others had their hair shaved off in public squares, their bald heads a mark of shame. Some were branded with red-hot irons, a permanent reminder of their disgrace. Adulterous women might be locked in iron cages and displayed in marketplaces, while people hurled dung at them. For men, whippings or fines followed, but always accompanied by mockery, songs and laughter. And if you were young, the humiliation could ruin you for life. A girl caught sneaking kisses with a boy she wasn't betrothed to might be labelled a whore forever, no matter what really happened. Her parents' hopes of a good marriage collapsed. A boy branded as too eager or unmanly could be mocked endlessly, made to carry horns on his head in processions, the mark of a cuckold before he even had a wife. Now imagine it. You're 15, trembling as villagers drag you from a barn where you shared stolen moments with someone you love. They laugh, tie your wrists, smear your face with ash. You're shoved onto a donkey, forced to face backward as the crowd roars. Rotten vegetables splatter against your clothes. Children sing filthy songs about your body. Neighbours you've known all your life spit at your feet. By the end of the day, you're not just humiliated, you're branded for life. Even nobles weren't safe. Chronicles tell of adulterous lords forced to kneel in churches while priests read out their sins in front of servants. Queens accused of affairs were paraded under guard, heads shaved, their dignity shredded before foreign courts. Forbidden love wasn't just dangerous, it was catastrophic. For the church, these humiliations were necessary. They saw love outside sanctioned marriage as chaos, sin, disorder. By turning punishment into a public carnival, they reinforced control. Every laugh, every jeer, every bruise on a young couple's pride reminded the village. Your body is not your own. Your desire belongs to God, your family, and your neighbours. Modern dating might leave you with heartbreak, rejection, or embarrassment, but at least you don't risk being smeared with tar, shoved onto a donkey backward, and paraded through the streets, while children sing songs about your lust. In the Middle Ages, that was the price of forbidden love. Forget happy endings. In the Middle Ages, when a girl's honour was questioned, there wasn't mercy, there wasn't justice, there was only damage control. And damage control meant one thing: force her to marry the very man who ruined her. The logic was twisted but relentless. A girl's virginity was her family's wealth. If she lost it before marriage, willingly or by force, she was considered spoiled goods. Suitors turned away, dowries shriveled, reputations collapsed. Families panicked, not over her pain, but over the shame. The solution? Bind her to her violator, make it look legitimate. Pretend the violence was love all along. The church, far from protecting victims, often blessed these unions. Priests preached that marriage healed dishonour, transforming sin into sacrament. A girl sobbing at the altar wasn't seen as tragic. She was seen as purified. The man beside her, smirking with triumph, walked away not as a criminal, but as a husband. Families colluded in the cruelty. Fathers who should have defended their daughters instead bargained with the offender. "You'll marry her," they demanded, "and you'll pay no dowry." The man gained a wife at discount price. The family salvaged their honour. The girl, she was sentenced to spend her life in the arms of the very person who had destroyed her. Some villages staged grotesque rituals to cement the charade. A girl accused of dishonour was paraded through the streets, head bowed, while neighbours jeered. Then she was delivered to her new husband like livestock. The wedding feast wasn't a celebration. It was a burial of her freedom. Guests mocked, songs dripped with filth, and her tears were hidden behind veils of laughter. Chronicles reveal shocking cases. In France, young girls were forced to wed men twice their age after being caught in barns or fields. In England, records describe priests presiding over ceremonies where brides trembled, silent under duress. Some didn't even speak vows. Family spoke for them, shoving rings onto their fingers. Resistance was useless. To say no meant ruin for everyone. And for men there was no punishment. In fact, forcing marriage often rewarded them. They gained a wife, sometimes with land attached, and walked away shielded by law and church. A man could assault a girl, then claim her hand in marriage as if it were a prize. Society winked and nodded, muttering that at least she's taken care of now. Now imagine yourself. You're 15, crying in your father's house, after a man cornered you in the fields. You beg for comfort. Instead, your father snarls that you've brought shame on the family. The next day, you're dragged to church. Neighbours whisper, priests chant, and the man who hurt you grins as he takes your hand. Everyone calls it salvation. You know it's a prison, and the cruelty lingered. Women forced into these marriages endured lifetimes of abuse. Husbands who began with violence rarely grew gentle. Neighbours who once mocked continued to gossip, reminding the woman daily of her fall. Her body became property, her voice erased, her pain normalised. This wasn't rare, it was systematised. Whole communities accepted it. Parents prioritised honour over children. Priests sanctified cruelty. Villages turned their heads, and the victims lived and died under the weight of silence. Modern dating may bring heartbreak, but in the Middle Ages, a single night, a single rumour, a single act could chain you forever to the person who destroyed you. There was no escape, no second chance, just a lifetime of forced smiles, cold beds, and whispered prayers that no one answered. So now you've seen it. Dating in the Middle Ages wasn't dating at all. It was humiliation wrapped in ritual, survival disguised as romance, and shame paraded as tradition. Every step of the way, intimacy was stolen by the crowd, dictated by the church, bargained by families, and mocked by neighbours. Think about it. Gifts weren't flowers or sweet notes. They were lumps of fat, baskets of eggs, or belts laced with dirty innuendo. Festivals weren't gentle dances. They were spectacles where boys ripped clothes off girls, where couples were shoved into mud, and where whole villages sang obscene songs about who liked whom. Privacy never existed. Every blush was fuel for gossip, every laugh an invitation for mockery. Courtship rituals didn't celebrate love, they weaponized it. The bedding ceremony turned a couple's first night into a drunken circus, with relatives stripping clothes and torches lighting every humiliating moment. Virginity wasn't sacred. It was scrutinized, inspected, tested. Families demanded proof in the form of bloody sheets. Midwives peered at terrified girls, and communities spread rumours that stuck for life. and if something went wrong, the punishment was savage. Forbidden lovers were smeared with soot, paraded backward on donkeys, mocked with horns tied to their heads. Couples were dragged into town squares, bound together with yokes, or locked in cages while neighbours hurled dung. Fathers forced daughters into marriages with their violators. Priests blessed the unions, turning trauma into sacrament. This was the brutal truth of romance in the Middle Ages. Your body was never yours. If you were a girl, you were a dowry, a womb, a symbol of your family's honour. If you were a boy, you were livestock in human form. Your worth measured in pigs, acres, or ale. Love was irrelevant. Attraction was irrelevant. What mattered was survival, economics, and control. And yet, here's the strangest part. Amid all this filth and shame, love did exist. It slipped through cracks, hidden in secret glances, stolen moments, and whispered promises. Couples snuck away into barns, riversides, or dark alleys, risking humiliation and punishment for the chance to feel something genuine. Troubadours sang songs about passion, even as their audiences laughed and jeered. And every so often, two people managed to cling to affection in a world designed to crush it. Now put yourself in their shoes one last time. You're young, standing in a muddy street, watching as families haggle over your future like cattle. The boy you like can't afford your dowry. The girl you dream of is promised to another. And the person you'll end up with, chosen not by your heart, but by your father's coin purse, your mother's reputation, and your village's cruel jokes. That's what dating meant. A performance, a transaction, a humiliation, a prison disguised as tradition. So next time you cringe over a bad date or laugh about an awkward silence at dinner, be grateful. No one's ripping your clothes off at a festival. No one's parading you backward on a donkey for kissing the wrong person. No one's demanding you bleed on a sheet to prove your worth. Medieval romance was dirty, cruel, and merciless. And now you know the truth. Love wasn't celebrated in the Middle Ages. It survived in spite of them.